There is no phone ringing, damn it!
Hello, welcome back to my world of stuff. My name, as ever, is that. It's another retro movie review today, and we're going back to 1971 and The Omega Man, starring the late great Charlton Heston. This is interesting because I've always thought that my strange, and some might say morbid, fascination with post-apocalyptic and apocalyptic stories and fiction, I've always sort of pinpointed that as what I sometimes call the unholy triumvirate from 1975 of BBC One Survivors, BBC One's children's series The Changes, and my reading John Wyndham's Day of the Triffids. All of these things happened for the first time at the same time in March, April 1975. Certainly in that time in 75. I read Day of the Triffids when I went to college to do my A-levels. The Changes and Survivors both came on TV at the same time. But of course, now in retrospect, and certainly when I was looking through my Blu-rays of what to do next for a retro movie review, I remembered that I had The Omega Man, and I remembered it was 1971, and I remember seeing it in 1971 when it came out the cinema. And I think that probably that's where it started. That would have been my first exposure to stories about the end of the world, and began that strange fascination, which those later series and books, and I've read loads of books on those topics ever since. There's still, people still write those sorts of books. Now, there is this endless fascination with stories about civilization collapsing and how people survive on the detritus and the debris of the world that's gone, and trying to rebuild society and rebuild lives for themselves. And I just find that endlessly fascinating. I've read so many books, some better than others, seen too many films and TV series. I've been wondering lately if that fascination is wearing off slightly, because obviously we've lived through not exactly an apocalypse, but a situation that's sort of not a billion miles away from what we've seen in some of these things, with a lethal disease that it hasn't gone as far as these sort of stories, but that's that sort of thing. And I think perhaps the reality of it probably won't be quite as exciting as the fiction of it, because certainly there's been a couple of entries into that genre lately which I haven't really taken to. Why the Last Man and The Stand, both of those I gave them a chance, but either because they weren't very good, or perhaps the time isn't right for those sorts of stories at the moment, because neither of them were particularly successful. So I'm just thinking that probably The Omega Man is where my interest in that particular subgenre starts. If you've never seen it, it stars, as I said, Charlton Heston, it stars Rosalind Cash and Anthony Zerber. They're the three main characters. It's not exactly a chamber piece, but it's a very moody and atmospheric film. Now, the first thing to bear in mind about this was made in 1970-71, so it has a very 70s aesthetic about it. So it is very old-fashioned. I mean, you look at it now, and it's dated in terms of its style, the production, the music, and so on, but it still is a very powerful film. I've just watched it again. Still packs a punch. It's still, it pulls no punches. It's gritty, it's raw, and it's quite troubling. It's quite bleak. The story, I mean, it's set in 1977, and it tells of the survivor of a bacteriological battle, which has taken place in 1975, which has wiped out almost everybody on Earth. Now, this is based on the book I Am Legend by Richard Matheson, if that title rings a bell. Of course, you probably have seen the Will Smith version that came out a few years ago. And in fact, this has been filmed previously as, I think it was called Last Man on Earth, in the 60s with Vincent Price, which is also very good. This is the best version of the story. None of them are particularly faithful to the book, really. I suppose the first one probably is. If you remember, the Will Smith I Am Legend was let down slightly by some ropey CGI sort of zombie ghoul type creatures. But in this particular version, it's adjusted from the book, in that in the original book, it's a disease that sort of has a vampiric effect on people. In this, it's a virus which effectively chokes people and turns them into light-fearing sort of albinos. They shy away from the light. They live in the dark. They only come out at night. That gives our hero, Robert Neville, played by big Charlton Heston, it gives him the chance to wander around a deserted Los Angeles and pick up supplies and stop himself going mad by just getting out and about, going for runs, talking to himself a fair bit. But he lives in an enclosed building. I think he said at one point it's the home he's always lived in. And he's there in the night, and the booglies, the family, they call themselves, led by Anthony Zerbe's Matthias. They are wandering the city, causing havoc, destroying things, and they just want to track him down as the last normal man still left alive. And he's sort of fighting a rearguard action to stay away from them. You do wonder why he doesn't leave the city, get away from the city. There are certain plot holes that will occur to you when you're watching the film. But what I like about the film, what really stands out now, what makes it so memorable are those incredible scenes of the deserted, decaying city. I mean, a lot of it was filmed on Sunday mornings and at night time. I'm not sure you could do it to that extent now. You'd have to use a lot more CGI, as indeed they did in I Am Legend. But I think perhaps in these days it was a bit easier to capture those deserted street scenes. Although apparently I couldn't see them on the Blu-ray myself. There are some scenes where you can see people in the background and some cars and things moving, but I didn't spot that. I wasn't really looking for it, to be honest, because it's an engrossing story. It's the story of this one man who's got an immunity because he was a scientist and a researcher when all this was happening back in 1975. And he was in a helicopter trying to take this new vaccine he'd found, which would possibly stop this situation deteriorating. But the helicopter crashes when the pilot succumbs to the bacteria, which has a sort of choking effect on people and kills them outright. He succumbs as well. But luckily, he's got this experimental vaccine. He is luckily thrown clear of the helicopter, which is a bit of a miracle because it explodes in a fireball. But he injects himself with the vaccine and he has survived. But say he's just been living on his own, which is a bit of a thing. Not a very pleasant thing to do. So that's basically the story is him surviving, fighting off the advances of the family. Occasionally they break into his compound. They're taunting him. At one scene they sort of fire flaming catapult balls at him. It is a bit odd because if you remember in the Will Smith film, his home is completely shuttered. He's got these iron shutters around that sort of hold him in. Here Robert Neville is quite happily wandering around his apartment with the windows open, listening to these people taunting him. His security is not great. So, again, it's one of the little plot holes that you sort of, you do notice at some point. He discovers, however, that he isn't on his own, completely on his own, because he comes across some other survivors. He comes across Lisa, played by Rosalind Cash. She's a survivor, and she's one of a small group of people who are living out in the countryside, just outside the city. She's got a friend with her Dutch and her brother who is succumbing to the disease. They all seem to have a sort of immunity, but the disease will get them eventually. And her brother is starting to succumb to the disease. He's losing his complexion, his hair is going white, his skin is turning grey. Robert Neville manages to apply his serum to the boy and saves him. Inevitably, of course, he starts a bit of a relationship with Lisa, and they make plans to leave the city behind, to get away. Although his one ambition is to wipe out the family, is to water because he doesn't know where they are. But Lisa's brother does, and when he's recovered from the effects of the disease, he tells him where they are. Robert Neville, however, decides he doesn't want to hunt them down, and they're making their plans to leave the city, but the brother decides that he wants to go to the family to prove that he's right and that they can be saved. They're not monsters, that they should be given the cure and given a chance to have their humanity back, but they don't want their humanity back. And this leads to a very bleak ending, which I sort of remember seeing at the cinema in 71. I remember going to see it with my brother. I've been quite shocked at the way it ends because I'm not going to spoil it if you haven't seen it, because I would advise that you track it down. It's a very good film. But it's got a bleak ending, but also slightly upbeat as well. So it's a bit of both. But it's a very good film. As I say, it is dated. It's of its time. It's very much of the 1970s. It's directed by Boris Sagal. And I was interested to note that the music is by one Ron Grainer. That name you'll know, of course, from the Doctor Who theme. He created the Doctor Who theme, which was realised by Delia Derbyshire at the BBC Radiophonic Workshop. And he did lots of things. He did Steptoe Sound and loads of other stuff. And this is one of his film things. And it's interesting that I don't know a lot about Ron Grainer. I'd actually like to find out a bit more about him, how he ended up working on quite a big blockbuster American film. Anyway, that's by the by. It's a really good film. You have to make concessions and allowances for the sort of 70s groovy fashion. But I think in terms of diversity and so on, Lisa and her brother, they're black characters, and they've got the big afro hair. And this is sort of quite unusual. You get an interracial kiss, and that was all. It's second nature today. We don't notice these things anymore, quite rightly so. But this was quite sort of groundbreaking at the time, and I don't know if it caused much of a furore, but I think it is noted as one of those sort of quite important cultural landmarks, if you like, this sort of interrelation. If you like your apocalyptic films, I really recommend this. As I say, go in expecting some slight corniness, but the visuals are great. There are some really stark images of this deserted city, and this, you know, it pulls, like I say, it pulls no punches in its visuals. You get lots of scenes of sort of mummified corpses and things that have been lying around for all. So it's a bleak film, but it's still very powerful. And I watched it again, and I was a bit worried in case time hadn't treated it too well, but it does still stand up very well, and it's highly recommended. It's The Omega Man. It's available on Blu-ray. I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10 because it is a very powerful film, one I have fond memories of, and as I say, I do believe it is the trigger for my interest in those sort of apocalyptic films. Right, hope you enjoyed this video. If you have, you know what you need to do. You need to subscribe. Please subscribe to this channel. Be a love, subscribe, like, thumbs up, and leave a comment and all that sort of stuff. And I'll be back soon with more bits and pieces. There will be, obviously. That's it from me for now. Hope you've enjoyed this video. Like, subscribe, etc., etc. Till I see you next time, you know what they say, because they say it. Keep taking the stuff.